Thank you so much, Nancy, and I'm so glad to be here. And I'm so glad today to be able to introduce my friend Tom Dart and welcome him to Lake County and to the Stevenson Center on this absolutely incredible fall day. I heard Tom speak recently about today's topic in a continuing legal education seminar at the Chicago Bar Association. And I know that you'll find his talk today very interesting and very provocative. There's a lot of work to be done, and the Cook County Sheriff's Office could not be in better hands. As Cook County Sheriff, Tom Dart has brought an aggressive yet innovative approach to law enforcement. A former prosecutor and state legislator, Sheriff Dart has long fought to protect the most vulnerable members of our society. I served 4 terms with Tom when we both served as state legislators. He sponsored hundreds of bills that demanded accountability from state officials while also showing a willingness to take on state bureaucracy. He rewrote child welfare bills, he wrote the state's Sexually Violent Predators Commitment Act, and led the state's first ever study connecting homelessness and prostitution. I can personally attest, come on in, I can personally attest to how hard he worked, how smart he was and is, and how much he got done that made a difference. Even then, I was honored to co-sponsor legislation with Tom. Not to say that all of Illinois' legislators aren't working hard. Let's just say that Tom Dart is. He was and is a dynamic leader. Since becoming sheriff in 2006, he has introduced sweeping changes at the Cook County Jail, and many of you have heard about it from national reports. The Cook County Jail is the nation's largest single-site jail. He aggressively restructured the sheriff's police force, and he improved operations in the court services department. Among his many innovations, he ordered electronic monitoring to relieve overcrowding and expanded jail agricultural services to provide job skills for inmates and lower costs for taxpayers. He's organized special gang units to curb suburban gang activity. He reformed the way sheriff's police handle prostitution arrests, steering prostitutes toward rehabilitative services through the Sheriff's Women's Justice Program rather than jail. And he's overhauled the county's approach to foreclosure evictions. At the Cook County Department of Corrections, the sheriff oversees a population of over 12,000. He's been hailed for his progressive reforms to improve and maintain the safety and security of all those housed and employed at the Cook County Jail. There are approximately 2,500 to 3,000 people with diagnosed mental illnesses on any given day in the jail, making it literally the largest mental health facility in the country. Sheriff Dart firmly believes that a service provider is a far more productive setting than a jail for those with mental illness. In 2013, he launched the Office of Mental Health Policy and Advocacy, which operates a 24-hour care line for mentally ill ex-inmates and families of currently mentally ill inmates, while screening all pre-bond detainees for mental illness. Sheriff Dart has received many accolades and many national awards and local awards from mental health advocacy organizations for his push to end what has actually now become a de facto criminalization of mental illness. A few years ago, Time magazine named Sheriff Dart one of the 100 most influential people in the world, thanks to his groundbreaking efforts. Tom and his wife, Patricia, live on Chicago's South Side and are the proud parents of 5 young children. Thanks for all you're doing, Tom. I'm proud to call you a friend, and thanks for being with us here today at the Stevenson Center. We're very, very grateful to have you.
That's so kind. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Lauren. Yeah, we had a great time in Springfield for like a year or so, I think, maybe, and then it went screaming downhill from there. She was fantastic. I missed it, her and about 3 or 4 other people, maybe. It is such a shame, honest to goodness. I often tell people that if Springfield was not as dysfunctional as it is now, I would have probably stayed there forever, honest to goodness. I was one of, there was like 2 or 3 of us that were lawyers that did not practice law. Our full job was a legislator, making $45,000, $50,000 a year, whatever it was at that point. But fully engaged in the legislative process, and it was very difficult for people like us to find out that the process was somewhat hijacked and became very difficult for democracy to sort of flourish, to be quite frank with you. So a lot of us left, and now I find it sort of startling that a lot of people talk about when we were down there, those were the good old days. And I was like, what is going on now? I was like, how could it conceivably get any worse? And it has, apparently. So it is very difficult, but all that is really intimately tied into, frankly, what I was going to talk about here today. And primarily I was going to talk about the mental health issue as applies to the jail, but there's other areas that we work on there probably is equally disturbing. I'm not going to go off on some crazy tangents and talk about John Gacy or something like that, so don't worry about that. Though I have been told that I have the most depressing speeches in the world. All my topics are so difficult. But really, the mental health issue is something that we've been talking about for quite a while at the jail, and I don't know how else to put it. That I just find that if you were to be able to ask people who lived, say, in the time of Dickens, how do you think you are going to be looked upon by generations to come? None of them would have sat there and said, oh my God, he's going to write these novels and we're all going to look so horrible about how we treat children and how we treat people who have less. And I often think to myself, are we going to be that next generation? Are we going to be the ones that, 50 years, 100 years from now, people are going to sit there and say, oh wow, that was the generation where they locked up all the mentally ill in prisons and jails. And I often think like that. I mean, you cannot just keep thinking about the moment you're in, but to think about what your legacy is going to be as a group. And I find it to be very disturbing. On many levels, I often tell people that for my 5 children, when I look at them, I find that unlike my father, when he looked at me, I truly felt he was handing a better world off to me. And I know he felt that way. And when I look at my 5 children, I do not feel that way. I feel as if we now have built up a government that spends most of its time calling each other names, frankly. But the one thing that is, without any hesitation, is that it's dysfunctional and paralyzed. They get nothing done, virtually nothing done, ever. And so all these different issues that you would like to sit there and say that, Senator, we were just talking about a few moments ago, you have these challenges that always appear, that people take them on. They take them on with the notion that we are going to do that so the people coming after us don't have to do that. We're going to fix these things for them, and we owe it to them to do that. Instead, the generation we're in right now, it seems to be quite the contrary. It has no issue whatsoever with pushing problems off further and further and further, coming up with no solutions, and instead of trying to come up with solutions, just sitting there and really taking on the other side in the nastiest possible way. And I know campaigns forever have always been nasty, but these don't even revolve around campaigns. It's just basic issues. You can't have a civil discussion with people. You can't have a civil discourse. And there's really no desire at times to come to some type of agreement about how best we can address these problems. And so as a result of it, us becoming the largest mental health hospital, certainly in the state of Illinois, but under some estimations the largest in the country, was bound to happen. Because very, very thoughtful people realized that what we were doing with mentally ill people back in the 40s and 50s, and we can play around with a couple of years either way here, that was not the best thing to do. That they were being warehoused in mental health hospitals with very little thought at times to how to treat them, and that they were just basically out of sight, out of mind. Incredibly thoughtful people came together and said, this is not good. This is not what we as a society want to be looked at and thought of. And so the notion was, let's get them out of the hospitals, let's put them into the community settings where they can get better treatment, thoughtful treatment, something we can be proud of. The problem was, though, is that there was never really the follow-through on the service side of it. And what I've come to find out, it's almost as if you don't get the money and the commitments literally up front, people will find a million ways to say, well, that isn't an existing program, so we don't have to worry about upsetting people. We just aren't going to fund that. And so as a result of it, over the course of many, many years, the lack of funding has increased and increased to the point now where the funding for mental health services throughout the country is abysmal. Our state, particularly bad. We were always, I think we were the 3rd leading state for cuts in mental health spending. And once again, I suppose it'd be easy for me to sit there and point my finger at like one person or one party and say, no, just as a collective, people have decided that this is an issue that we don't need to focus on. And so I often tell people, this is more an indictment of our society than anything else. It'd be so much neater to say it was a specific person. It isn't. Collectively, this has been allowed to go on. And so as a result of it, I often tell people in the most simplistic way that I could imagine if they came up with some miracle drug that dealt with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, so that we didn't need the community services, we didn't need the hospitals, we didn't need a thoughtful plan, because people now aren't suffering from those type of mental illnesses. And then we can ratchet back those programs. That didn't occur. What occurred is just continuing non-funding elimination of programs. And so as a result of that, the need is and was still there. The need didn't go away. So where are these people going to go then? So you didn't fund the programs in the community. The mental health beds have plummeted, just plummeted throughout the country. So whatever someone might feel about the issue of putting people in mental health hospitals, those numbers have plummeted. And I would suggest to you, based on the people that I deal with on a daily basis, there is a place for that. There are certain people that need to be in a hospital setting. Most do not, but that is a component of it. And all of that is vanishing. It's interesting. The only reason I brought this with, I can never stick to a script. My staff, I drive them nuts because I am never on message. And I just brought this, though, just for this one little part, though, to give you some type of numbers here. Just this is, and these numbers are not in any way disputed. In 2012, there were an estimated to be 350,000 inmates with severe mental illness in prisons and jails. There was also approximately 35,000 patients with severe mental illnesses in state psychiatric hospitals. The number of mentally ill persons in prisons and jail was 10 times the number remaining in state hospitals. In 44 of the 50 states and the District of Columbia, a prison or jail in that state holds more individuals with serious mental illness than the largest remaining state psychiatric hospital. Those numbers are horrific. I mean, they're embarrassing. It's an outrage that this is what we are looking at right now, that it has become this. And so for us, it was something when I became sheriff, we had so many issues when I came on there, so I had a lot on my plate. But the issue of dealing with people who have mental illness was so obvious so quickly, because that was what I was looking at each and every day and watching the numbers explode. And I honestly struggled with it because I kept thinking to myself, all right, well, there's got to be some type of thoughtful plan in place, you know, some way that when they're leaving here, we're connecting you to this service or that service. And there wasn't any. There wasn't any. And so we had a mess on our hands. The numbers were exploding. There was nothing in place. In addition to which, when I first became sheriff, it was also the first year of Todd Stroger's administration. And so they went about changing a lot of the medical side of the jail. Where that is significant is that there's 102 of us sheriffs in the state of Illinois, and as I've come to find out, I thankfully am the most boring of the group. The rest of them do some of the craziest stuff you've ever seen. And I like just being boring, and so I'm going to continue my boring route here. But of the 102 of us, I believe, I'm pretty confident, I haven't done the phone poll, but I'm pretty confident I'm the only one of 102 who doesn't pick his medical provider or the person who provides mental health services. That is done by our county board through the health services now, but it's done through the county board. And so when I became sheriff, they obliterated what little services were left. They thought that that was something that didn't need to be done. So not only was the number of people with mental illness exploding in the jail, they were not even being identified. And so my staff was finding people suffering horrible mental illness in general population all the time, all the time. And so we tried talking to them. It was going nowhere. So what I ended up doing is I started bringing on to my staff mental health professionals, and I started bringing on a lot of them really quickly. And so what we started doing then was twofold. One, I brought them on to try to work with the mental health population that was exploding within the jail because the health side of it was not covering it. But then the other part, I started training my correctional officers to be mental health specialists. And so every single correctional officer that came on board and is with me now has gone through advanced mental health training, which is we're the only jail in the country that was doing it. I think there might be some others that have caught on now, but we were the only ones that were doing it. And this is intensive mental health training so that they can both identify people with mental health illnesses to get a hold of the medical staff, but also how to work with them to de-escalate issues and problems. And so we gave them those tools from the beginning. Virtually all of my 3,500 correctional officers have it now. And it's a version of what is called CIT training, where you try to get people trained on how to identify someone with mental illness and how to work with them. And so our staff does that. So we were trying to get things under control at that point, but I can't emphasize enough to you, this was just like this tidal wave that was overcoming us because the numbers just kept pouring in. And once again, not really hard to figure out. When folks have nowhere else to go in the community, they're going to end up with me. And the people that I have, honest to God, the whole thing is so difficult for me because you like to think us as humans have a certain level of empathy for your fellow man. These people, the stories are heartbreaking. They're absolutely heartbreaking, and you find yourself looking in the mirror saying, that could be me. Absolutely could be me. It would be so much more convenient to sit there and say, that person's evil, it's a bad person. Quite the contrary. This individual has an illness, and we collectively have thrown them in jails. And that's what I see every day. The offenses that they're charged with, by and large, across the spectrum, are crimes of survival. You'll find they're in there for retail theft. They're stealing something to eat. They're stealing something. Frequently, they'll tell me, they'll steal stuff, they don't even know why they stole it. They'll be charged with criminal trespass to land, sort of like a burglary. They're breaking in places to sleep. They'll be charged with batteries to people because someone approaches them on the street, they'll take a swing at them maybe. They'll be charged frequently with drug possession because why? They have no medication out there right now, so they're self-medicating. So they'll have heroin on them, which heroin, from what I've grown to understand, is very close to one of the drugs that is used to treat, I get it mixed up, it's either bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. It's one of the two. So these folks across the board are coming in droves, not because they're bad people, not because they're criminals at all, but because they have an illness. And I've told people, how is that any different if we started doing the same thing for people that say have diabetes? And say, okay, you have diabetes, we're locking you up. That's what we're going to do. This is an illness. It's an illness, pure and simple. And they're not in there because they're criminals. They're in there because they're sick. And we have gone about now having to deal with not this issue in the way where we're sitting there saying it's someone else's problem and whining and complaining about it. No, we've been talking about it because we're trying to wake people up to this and wake them up so they'll do something about it. In the meantime, though, the thing that I always have been and continue to be obsessive about, I'm very, very impatient. And though I used to consider myself literate. Now, between the 13-hour days and the 5 children, I've become a book collector. I collect books. I don't actually get to read too many of them before I get what's Amelia Bedelia I was reading last night. Thrown at me. And then then things don't ever get completed. But the reality of it is, there's certainly, clearly, this issue and many other issues, there's a place for a great deal of debate, a great deal of thought, plans to be put together, people to come up with strategies. I understand that. My impatience, though, as I tell people, is that needs to go on while we are doing something. Because while we talk, I have on average 200 people leaving my jail every day. I have about 3,000 of them, 3,500 of them with serious mental illness that are in my custody today. As I said, about 200 leaving me. I've got about another 250 to 300 coming in. And so we don't have the luxury of sitting back and studying this. We need to come up with programs right now. And so both training my correctional officers to identify and deal with people there, I brought more staff on that have specialties in counseling and working with mentally ill to help them with programming. And we sense in the last 2 or 3 years, Cermak Hospital, which is the provider for the county health services for me, great people. Gosh, they're great people. It has really helped tremendously, but they'll be the first to tell you that as confused and twisted as the hiring rules are in the county, and mind you, I was the first office holder in the state to get certified by Michael Shackman as being in compliance with the hiring. As difficult as hiring might be, the county health side of it has an impossible time hiring people, so their staffing levels are very, very low, and that challenges them a lot. So we put that together as far as things within the bounds of the jail. But then the big problem that I was having was the fact that I wanted to do something on the front end. And so I wanted to start identifying people as they came in and try to plead with the judiciary that they don't belong here, that this is someone who's ill, and they don't belong in a jail. We'll put them in any type of setting you want. If you have somewhere in the community, Judge, great. If not, I've worked out some relationships with some people that own some type of hospitals where we can put them in there, we'll put a bracelet on their leg, I'll monitor them, we'll do the whole thing. So I hired 4 individuals with differing mental health degrees who every morning when the humanity gets dumped off at my doorstep there, and as I say, it's usually between 200 and 300 people every day, we have about 2 hours to interview them and to try to find out what their mental health status is. And you can imagine it's particularly challenging. The reason I have 2 hours is we got to get them upstairs very quickly for a bond hearing in front of a judge. So in this very limited window of time, we interview them, we download I checked my records within the jail because it's something that was no shock to me whatsoever. Most of them have been in my jail before. I take all that information together, we give it to the public defender to go up to court to try to plead for an alternative setting. It has not worked out very well. Our judiciary is horrifically disengaged, just horribly disengaged. And so trying to work with them has been next to impossible. And I've gotten in some pretty high-profile fights with our chief judge over the last few years. And I often tell people, I didn't start out that way, but it was after 2 years of pointless meetings with nothing getting done, I felt compelled that I could no longer just sit back and go along and just be one of those go-along people, don't rock the boat, don't upset people, just continue to have pointless meetings, check the boxes off, whatever. So I started a very high-profile fight with him that has continued somewhat to this day, but I've been able to get some things done with him. But the judiciary as a whole has just been horrifically disengaged with this issue. They really didn't need me to do it. Some people would suggest to you that a sheriff is not in the ideal position to be doing the advocacy for mentally ill people. It's more a function of the judiciary or other offices, but they left this void. So we have been doing it. We've had modest luck in the front end. So the other thing I started doing, which once again was driven so much by just how bad things are. I'd love to sit there, and I often tell people, here's the other thing too, I would have much more faith in this than if you were looking at the head of the largest mental health hospital in the state of Illinois who had a doctorate in psychology. I'm a history major. I'm not the right person to be doing some of this stuff, but when you're sort of forced into it, you figure things out, and you figure them out in a hurry. And so just as a common sense type of approach, I thought that at a baseline, what we were doing at the back end now, so worked on the front end to divert them, treating them while they're with me, but on the back end, we literally, as a sheriff, you're supposed to follow all the rules and all the rest of that stuff. I'm still working on that. And but you get a court order, it says hold someone, then you get the court order, say release him. You're not told release him when you want, release him in whatever form or fashion. You're supposed to release him. So traditionally that's what you did. Well, I was seeing person after person being released who were still acutely mentally ill, and you're told to let them go on the street. And I was like, well, how thoughtless is this? I mean, this is horrible, absolutely horrible. So we started putting together a discharge planning route for people. And we started working with organizations such as NAMI, giving us DVDs so that when people were being discharged, I'd put them in different holding rooms to play DVDs for them, have staff talk to them about what's out there, and start to begin to put together discharge plans for them. We've been doing that pretty aggressively, and we've had some degree of luck, but the biggest difficulty is the obvious one. There aren't that many services out there. So when I'm trying to plan for people to connect them, there's not a lot out there. And inherently, one of the things that most normal people don't know about the distinction, but it's incredibly significant in this world, in this context, is that people confuse prisons and jails. When somebody enters a prison, the warden knows almost to the minute when that person's being released. So you can do all sorts of planning, you can figure out when that person's going to go, how you're going to connect them to the community. Jails don't have that luxury. We literally have no idea when people are coming or going. We don't know. We don't know when someone's going to be with us literally 10 minutes or when someone's going to be with us 10 years. And I would love to tell you, 10 years, you're making up numbers. No, I have people waiting still on their trials. Not a lot of them. I have some people waiting on their trials still who've been with me 8, 9, 10 years. But so because I don't know inherently when people are leaving, it makes it a little tricky. What I've done, though, is relying on some of my experience as a former state's attorney myself. There's certain people you can sort of predict are going to be leaving your custody soon. So what I did is we used to run a boot camp. I honestly never really found the magic in a boot camp. I'd never seen numbers, statistics showing me that they turn people around by getting them to march and do push-ups and things like that. And so I changed mine, and the media gave me a nice little push too because there was some issues going on out there, so they sort of helped my thinking along a little bit here. But I shut down my boot camp. I reformed that into this thing, and I won't go off on the tangent, but it's really sort of cool. Other than the name of it, I got to change because it's called the Neighborhood Revitalization Initiative, which unfortunately breaks down to NRI, which is also the name of another program that the state ran that didn't work out real well. So, but the program's really cool. I get these people who otherwise would have been in a boot camp setting. I give them these really neat skills on how to disassemble houses, the market for recycling and all the rest of it. And we've been going into these distressed communities and taking down buildings that have been there for decades, literally destroying the entire view of the block. I mean, literally, the environment has changed like that once we've taken these buildings down. But these people are doing it. The only reason I bring it up, though, is they were on this gorgeous boot camp campus that was not attached to the jail. It was about 2 blocks away. I pulled them all out of there. I put them in a different building, a whole new mission for that. But then on the boot camp grounds, we've turned that into a mental health transition center now. So that this group of people that I'm sort of predicting are going to be leaving somewhat soon, I'm moving them out to the boot camp, which is somewhat of an idyllic setting. I mean, there's these Quonset huts, there's gardens, I have an aquaponics out there, I have a solar farm out there, very little barbed wire of any nature. And we've been shipping people out there now to work with them purely to get ready to hit the streets and to transition to the streets. And we started that about 3 months ago now. It's been outrageously successful. Honestly, God, I've sat in on some of the group meetings, guys. I've almost wanted to start crying when I hear what their stories are, what they're talking about, and about the hope they see now, because they'll tell you it's the first time anybody's ever cared. And so we've begun to put together these plans for them now for when they hit the street that it was never been done before. We run our own hotline now to work with the families and the detainees. So when they leave, if they go into crisis, they'll call us. We actually have a van that we can send out there as well to help them. And so we've been trying to put together this system as quickly as we can, given the fact that there's nothing else out there. And we've been working with some different groups, but these groups have all had their funding cut, so they don't have much else that they can do out there. And I've tried to work with some of the other governmental institutions, but it's just some of them, it's not their mandate. Other ones, as they say, are somewhat indifferent. And when I talk to the judiciary, well, I've somewhat stopped talking to them lately. When I would talk to them, though, this issue would come up, and they'd always say, well, we have the mental health court. And I'd always be like, well, unfortunately for you, I'm not a moron. And so, and because they were always used to just spewing that out and telling people, oh, we've checked the box off, we're dealing with that. As I mentioned earlier, I have about 3,500 people on serious medications who are seriously mentally ill today in my jail. The mental health court in Cook County, their caseload for the entire year is under 200. And so I often say, I go, guys, I'm glad you have your mental health court. Keep doing it, very good. But what are we doing about this big, big population, which is really at the heart of it? And as I mentioned before to you, and I'm going to stop in a few seconds here because I do want to answer questions, and I know I've probably already exceeded my time limit. The reality of it is I spend a great deal of time in the living units with these mostly men, though the one thing I will mention to you, it's been sort of fascinating. In the course of the last 9 months or a year, our female population, the hard numbers have all been somewhat declining a little bit. The number of people coming in with mental illness, serious mental illness, that has been going up. And that's no mystery, as I say, because there's nowhere else for them to go. The number of females coming in with serious mental illness has been exploding, and we have no idea why. Absolutely no idea why. We just know that their acuity level when they come in right now is just outrageous. But I don't spend as much time in the female division, to be quite frank with you, because it's the smaller part of it. So I spend a lot of my time in the male division. And divisions, unfortunately. It's not just one. There's multiple ones because we have so many people who are sick. Their stories are absolutely heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. In virtually each and every one of them are ones that if you put a thoughtful plan together, you could at least say, if I did not prevent this person from coming back in the criminal justice system, where they don't belong to be in the first place, at least I'm going to extend that out. And in doing that, the savings, just the pure fiscal savings. So if someone does not want to look at this on the human side of it, if you don't want to do it, that's fine. On the fiscal side of it, this is unsustainable. It makes no sense. It's a broken model. All the rest, I can give you the numbers, it's 3 times as expensive to treat someone with mental illness than someone who's not. If we continue to do this, we are going to have crises throughout the country, not just in the financial side of it, but people going out to the streets in this condition, untreated, are going to hurt themselves, hurt other people, and at a bare minimum, they're going to continue to live this life that is one that none of us would wish upon anybody, where it's truly a life of trying to survive every single day. So I'd love to answer questions now because I know I was supposed to only speak for a short period of time and answer questions, and I've probably already exceeded it, so I'd love to answer questions.
What do you expect from this audience? Or what would you like to expect from the audiences that come to hear you speak?
You know, two things. One is I would love to have them wrap their arms around this issue as it pertains to where they're at, because this is an abomination throughout the country, and LA and New York have been sending a ton of people out to us to see what we're doing and how we're doing it, because they're getting sued and they have horrible issues there. And so this isn't isolated to just our county. I wish it was, to be quite frank with you. So wherever you're at, so say you're in Lake County, make sure that this is a priority, not just to your sheriff, but to everyone involved, to say, listen, do we have a thoughtful plan that we can be proud of in this county? And if the answer is no, and that's where, as I said, when I mentioned about the judges and their typical responses, it has to be an educated series of questions, because otherwise you will get people who will lie to you, right to your face, because they just want to keep doing what they do, which is, you know, work maybe 6-hour days and have a pretty nice life. We need to have people taking this on as an issue with a great sense of urgency that we got to do things with right now, and it has to be thoughtful and a plan that people are willing to back up with money. And so they need to go to their county boards, they need to go to the state and say, listen, I'm not asking for lots of money here, I'm asking for money that will help us implement case management planning for people coming out of a jail, so that when they leave, I have all their information when they're with me. There's really no mysteries. I know virtually everything about them. How is it that I cannot just hand that file off to someone in the community where that person lives so that they can work with them? I had gotten this outrageously intense, thorough computer system that I originally got to deal with gang issues in suburban Cook County. And really what it does is it congregates all this information and it can spit it out in whatever way you want it, and it can do all this analysis for you. I'm using that now for the mentally ill population without violating any HIPAA issues. Basically now, to give everybody who's walking out of my jail, it's going to be like a 2 or 3 page printout that will literally have a map. It'll show where their house is that they're going to. It'll then have bus routes for them to get to the clinics. It'll have bus routes to get to the places to get their subscriptions filled. It will have places where it'll have family members that they can go to who we've worked with ahead of time. This is all stuff I'm making up. And I often tell people, I go, if we have thoughtful people that would come together and sit down in a room, we could case manage our way out of this problem pretty quickly in a very thoughtful way. And so really what I would want this audience and the other group I talk to, just demand of the area that you live in a thoughtful plan that is somewhat funded to address this issue. Because otherwise it's just going to end up in this endless debate society, and it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way, and this is not that expensive. It really isn't. Yes?
Okay, in terms of each of the communities, what is the competition for the attention of the public? What is your competition?
You know what, that is a really good question, because you know the thing that I have found just to be so strange to me is that since I've taken this issue on, the last 5 or 6 years, I cannot tell you how many people that I have known for extended periods of time in my life who have approached me and talked about a brother, an uncle, an aunt who suffers from some serious mental illness and has for years. I only mention that because originally when I was thinking of, you know, what's the competition, I'm thinking, well, it's because it doesn't impact people, so they don't really care about it. But in the course of going through this, I cannot tell you how many people I come across, and I try not to live by anecdote, but how many people I come across who this has impacted them. So I think at the heart of it, mental health funding is a bigger issue. Has always been at the back end, and you know, Lauren Beth can talk about it as well, that when you know the budget crunch comes, people are always looking, now where can I cut where it's going to cause the least amount of pain? And least amount of pain usually is translated, where's the least amount of pain for my re-election issues? And that means, okay, well, we can't go after, you know, aging or something like that because seniors vote. We can't go after the education side because those people vote. Mental health, you know, who do we have? We've got, you know, some of these advocacy groups that are fantastic, and they really are, I mean that sincerely. But otherwise, I think that's where it has been allowed to flounder, because it is not impacting other people in a way that they're outraged about it. And I've been more puzzled by that as I've done more on this issue, because I have so many people that it has impacted. Yes?
Yeah, when you were in Washington, D.C. getting the award from NAMI for your advocacy work, you told a story about a young woman in medical school had a severe mental illness, ended up disappearing, and then unfortunately picking up a child at O'Hare Airport, and you were going to go try to get her bond reduced. Did that?
No, she's still in our custody. They set the bond for her at $450,000. These people are so tone deaf, I don't even know where to start. So this story was in the newspapers. So this woman has had some mental health issues, minor nature. Her family loves her intensely. The family's from Maryland, I believe it is. She came out here for college, one of the downtown colleges, and she was doing fine. She was on her meds, everything was fine. She has a roommate, everything's fine. And then all of a sudden she goes missing. She had never been involved in the criminal justice system ever. So all of a sudden she goes missing. Mom and her would talk every day. Mom doesn't hear from her, can't find her, doesn't know what's going on. They're making all sorts of frantic calls here, trying to find out what's going on. And the one other thing I can tell you, and this was, I'm not, trust me, I can't get involved with the Gacy stuff, but in the course of the Gacy thing, one of the things that became so apparent, the whole issue of missing persons, oh my God. Talk about something that's horrifically mismanaged. I mean, just horribly mismanaged. It's almost as if no one cares. Unless you're a unique child from a, frankly, a somewhat wealthy area, no one cares. They're always like, oh, she's a runaway. She runs away sometimes. She's with a friend, whatever it is. Well, so this woman calls and she's looking, she's getting run around, she's getting no information. The family's about to fly out here to try to search for themselves. They mean literally are heading out here to do that. And then she gets arrested it was O'Hare Midway, I think it was O'Hare, at one of those baggage terminals. Some woman was there with her 3-year-old waiting for her luggage, and this young woman walks up to, grabs the 3-year-old and runs off with him. She only makes it to the escalator, like 500 feet away, something like that. She thought that was her cousin. I mean, she was having horrible mental health issues. So she gets arrested. Our brain surgeons in the judiciary, they give her a bond of $450,000. So she would have to come up with $45,000 to get out. So she's still sitting in my jail right now. Here's someone that has no business being in our jail at all. And that case has been made, and I've been trying to engage the media in this story, and the difficulty they've had with it is they want to write about it because they think it's pretty outrageous as well, but the family does not, their public defender has told them not to engage. And that's been an interesting twist to me too, because in an effort to try to highlight this whole issue, I've been inviting the media into the jail all the time to see the realities of what we're doing here. And now the public defender's office, who I've had a pretty good relationship with, much better than the state's attorney's office, to be quite frank with you, they are telling their clients not to talk. And I'm like, why? Well, it could jeopardize their case. And I was like, oh, God, newsflash, former prosecutor, I understand these issues. No one talks about their case. We're talking about their illness. And then they start coming up with these tangential, bizarre, twisted logic. Well, that could come up in the sentencing. He's charged with a retail theft. I do not think this thing's going up to the U.S. Supreme Court, my friend. And yet they cling to this stuff. And I'm saying, listen, guys, either you start playing along with me, or I'm going to go to the media on you too. That we're trying to expose this issue, and you're coming up with all these bizarre reasons where you don't want these people talking to anybody. And it's the only way to make the case, because when you talk to the individuals we're talking about, they're incredibly normal, nice, decent people who are not criminals. And so they make the case for them. So that case, unfortunately, is still with us. That one's still with us. Yes, ma'am.
How do you handle medication in, when someone with mental illness, if you identify that they have mental illness in jail? Are they mandated to take, most of the time the people are in there because they're off their meds, if they ever were on meds, or if they were diagnosed. So how do you handle that?
We have less problems with people not wanting their meds than most. In some jails, it's like a big issue. It's an issue, but not a big one for us. Most of them take their meds without any hesitation. There was a time about 4 years ago when they would try to hide their meds in their mouth and things like that to sell them, but it wasn't like they didn't want to take them. So we don't have much of a problem with that. If it does get to be a problem, we can go to the court to get them mandated to take their meds, and we just don't have to do that often. But that's all done by the psychiatrists and psychologists at the Cermak Hospital, and they do a pretty good job of it. The big problem we have is when they leave, we give them a 2-week supply of meds to take with them, and they run out of that, and then it gets to be a problem then trying to get them to stay on their meds when they can't get meds anywhere. One of the things we started doing over a year and a half ago, is I started signing people up at our intake on the Affordable Care Act. So I started signing up the detainees for the Affordable Care Act, and I think it's just over 6,000 inmates I've signed up for the Affordable Care Act in the last year, a little over a year. So that's been helpful. but it's still been a little bit of an issue trying to make sure that they have a place they can go and get their meds so they can stay on them. Less of a problem inside, outside's always the big problem. Yes, ma'am?
Just out of curiosity, is there a country out there that just handles this whole thing really well overall that we could try to emulate?
That's a very good question and a straightforward question that wish I had a better answer for you. I honestly don't know. I asked that question of some of the different advocacy groups, and they've told me there aren't too many. They mentioned, I think, 1 or 2 countries, the ones you would typically think of. They were in the Scandinavian area. Yeah, exactly. That they said were really good, but I haven't had enough time to really, sort of dig into that one as much as I'd like to. But just around the country, nothing. And most of the advocates all come to us because they love what we're doing, and they keep talking about modeling the other places over what we're doing right now. So around the world, I think it's a small group that do it well. Not too many, though, do. Yes, sir?
I'm going to broaden this question a little bit
Oh, please do.
by first telling you that as a former county board commissioner, I, more than anybody, appreciate anybody who's heading a department and really doing the kind of things that you're doing. I have a couple of questions about the judiciary and the legislature, because that was something that we were faced, I'm going to say 15 years ago, with overcrowding, building requests for $47 million to build an additional jail, that kind of thing. The question I always tried to pose to the judiciary, which is why I really appreciated your comments about it, was, do we have any leftover legislation from the Get Tough on Crime period in the 80s, which were sending a lot of people into the county jails that didn't need to be there? Not necessarily the population that you're talking about. Primarily, it would have been the people who were on drugs and that kind of thing. I never got any member of the judiciary in our county to try to look into it and see whether or not there was something on the books that didn't need to be there at this time, given the experience.
They're a very strange group. Collectively, they're very strange. Because if you think about it, they should be some of the boldest people in the entire spectrum, because for all intents and purposes, they have lifetime appointments. Once they get elected, honest to God, it takes an act of God for them not to get retained. And some of the stuff they've done, you'd think they'd all be getting retained. But the reality of it is, so they have a very secure job. You think it would lend itself to people who'd be bold and thoughtful. But they're all, honest to God, individually there's a lot of very good people who are judges, absolutely, people I've known for periods of time. But when they get together collectively, I've never seen more cowardly actions in my life, as far as afraid of their own shadows, afraid to speak out. They come up with all sorts of weird interpretations of judicial rules to prevent them from talking about this issue or that issue or another issue, where clearly they're stretching it, where they can be more engaged. One of the guys, there's a guy, Judge Leafman from Florida, phenomenal.
Yes,
he has been leading the charge down in Florida and around the country.
He built a building,
He,
especially for this.
yeah,
But
he's great.
In defense of the judiciary, currently, we have somebody in the civil division who's tackled an issue which somebody alluded to that you talked about, or did something about foreclosures. And so we do have a judge in Lake County now who's taken it upon himself to expand what could be done, and they're working on it, and I think
They move so slow, honestly.
Well, no, this is in progress, but that's another story. So my question to you at this juncture about this is, are there any legislative actions that you know of that could clear out some of the population in the jails that would leave a population of mental health patients to get sufficient or at least improved conditions I mean,
Nah, you know what? I be honest with you. Well, you know, one of the things that part of this makes me feel good. The other part of this is, once again, an outrageous statement of our society. Is I can't tell you how many detainees tell me over and over again when they're in my jail, it's the best treatment they ever get. That they love coming here because they get treated so well. And I'm like, I really don't know how to take this. I'm glad we do well, but I don't want you here, and you shouldn't be here, and it's like, oh, God. And then once the winter months come. But as far as just laws on the books that would somehow clear the deck, they really aren't there, because at the heart of it right now, and I'm not trying, it's not just the judiciary. There needs to be, as a society, we have to demand that for people with mental illness, A, they don't go into jails and prisons if they're mentally ill, and that's why they're there. Trust me, there's some people who have mental illness who committed horribly violent offenses. That's about 15% in that range, and that's a little bit negotiable. The other ones, they're not. They're ill. And so we need to say they shouldn't be in there in the first place. But if for some reason they come into our system, that we demand that there's a thoughtful plan for when they exit the system as well. But so that needs to be there. But where the judiciary gets to be so troublesome is that, yeah, are there some laws in the book that maybe could be tweaked and things like that to make things a little better? Maybe. But if they would start using the bond hearing issue, I'm talking about my county, better, more thoughtfully, oh my God, the amount of progress we can make would be amazing. I had a gentleman from the Atlantic magazine, he's writing some article about what we're doing. I think this month, next month, it's coming up soon. So he was with me down, and we were in one of the tunnels, and we were talking about all the mentally ill going here, and then I just mentioned in passing, I said, yeah, and you know, the bond hearings are really killing me too, because you know, they do them in 20 seconds or less, and he's like, whoa, Sheriff, what? I said, yeah, they do them in 20 seconds or less. He goes, well, is that just you and your dislike for the judiciary? And I said, let's just be clear. I do dislike them, okay? So I'm not ducking that one. But I go, that's just the reality. So he said, yeah. I go up and see yourself. And so sure enough, he went upstairs and he came down and he goes, first bond hearing, Sheriff, was 10 seconds. The second one was 16 seconds. Then they had a 40-second one that was really the big one for the day. And I was like, and once again, as a former state's attorney who sat through bond hearings and stuff, I couldn't conceive of how can you think about it, the two most significant events that's going to occur to someone in the criminal justice system is obviously their disposition, so whether they plea or they're found guilty is one. But the second one is their bond hearing. Are you going to be held in custody, away from your family, your job, everything else, or are you going to be allowed to go home? In our county, an outside group called the Appleseed Foundation, they're a fantastic group, they did the study, not me. The average bond hearing in Cook County, the average bond hearing was 18 seconds. How in God's name could anybody spit anything thoughtful out? So if they took advantage of this bond hearings and said, you know what, we are going to put in a whole 8-hour day today, we're going to work really hard, and said that, you know, we're going to have thoughtful bond hearings, so that if someone has mental illness, we're going to allow both sides to talk about it. We're going to sit there with solutions and say, okay, we don't need to lock this person out. You know, Sheriff, can you find us a place in the next 2 hours where you can get this guy a bed? And I can scramble, because I find beds for people all the time. I have a contract with 2 different companies where I had like 200 beds a day I pay for so that people aren't in my jail. And they get treatment at them, all the rest of this stuff. I go, I'm happy to do anything, guys, but you have to get involved with this thing. Instead, so the laws could help maybe a little bit, but it's the players right now that are the problem. And they just need to be more thoughtful, not afraid to make these type of decisions that might be, could something blow up on them? Every decision can blow up. And I've often told people, I'm so puzzled how a thoughtful person could ever utter those words. Because you could have someone with no criminal history whatsoever in on a retail theft that you then give an appropriate bond, an I bond, so they don't have to put any money up. They just sign their name and walk out the door. That person could go out and blow up a school bus. We can't predict anything. So unless you're doing something completely off the charts, there is no predictability. You just have to be thoughtful, and people will back you up when you're thoughtful. But when you treat this literally as the system, where you're grinding up humans into the system with no thought, that's where I have the problem, because you can't look at it like that. These are real human beings who are sick and who are ill, and they need our help. And for the rest of them there, we have people that, yeah, we have a lot of people in our jail in Cook County with drug offenses, but traditionally, where this gets to be somewhat misinterpreted, and it doesn't do a service to anybody, is that their charge they're in on today is a drug case, but they might have just got out of the prison on an armed robbery a month ago. So the fact the judge set a significant bond on them, that I don't have a problem with, because this person has a violent background. But sometimes people will go and just cherry pick, you know, all these people in on drug offenses, They don't really look underneath that. And so a thoughtful system, one we had more faith in, we wouldn't be worried about that. We'd know thoughtful hearings are going on, and then we could actually get down to the point where we could sit there and say, there's that one law that is really causing us a problem. Right now, we wouldn't even know where to start because we don't even have thoughtful bond hearings. Yes, sir.
Sheriff, hi. It's more of a statement than a question. My name is Jason Pat. I'm the candidate for sheriff here in Lake County.
Oh,
And I just wanted to, first of all, applaud you for all the work that you've done in Cook County. I know that here in Lake County in the jail system that there's a lot of problems. Mental health is not being addressed at all. And as a, excuse me, as a former correctional officer myself, I saw it firsthand. I saw what's going on. And I've been to 26 in California to pick up people from my department. And you can totally tell the difference. So I just wanted to thank you for what you're doing in Cook County. And after December 1st, I look forward to working with you to try and raise Lake County as far as mental health goes to the bar that you've made in Cook County.
Okay.
So I just want to thank you for that and just tell you I look forward to working with you.
Good. Hey, thanks so much. Thank you so much. Yes.
I have a question about the families of mentally ill prisoners. Are there supports in place for them to be able to help their family member when they're released? And are there advocacy groups among them?
Yeah, we started a family support group about 3 years ago. And so we've been working with a lot of families, and there's been some groups that have formed as a result of that, but it's not as extensive as you might want. I mean, we like the one we run. We just wish we could do more of it. There's a handful of folks that are doing the majority of the heavy lifting here, and so we could do more. We really could, but the families we have worked with, it's been really neat because, I mean, so many of them, when you talk to a lot of the folks that are in my custody, they'll come right out and tell you about just the horrible things they've done to their family over the years and how they can't go back there. And there's been times we've been able to sort of bridge that gap and say that, listen, he's doing much better now and he's in a different place and he's been medicated and he's staying on his meds for some, and we've been able to bring some families together there. So it's been somewhat of a something. I knew it. Yeah, guess who? Yeah. Traditionally, that'd be me. But yeah, so it's an area that we targeted, and it started off incredibly humbly because once again, we were just churning people out onto California Avenue at all hours of the night, which, so thoughtless, you don't even know where to start with it. So then we started calling families up because some of the people that we were leaving, and once again, I don't really have any control over them at that point, so it's more me really just trying to reason with people in because they've got their order, they can be released. I can't make them stay with me, but for some of the folks who are really sick, we'll try to get a hold of their families, and when we can or can't, and if we do and they don't want to help, then some people will drive down the street to Mount Sinai Hospital and we'll have them committed for a short period of time because it's just in good conscience. You can't just let them wander out that way. But so there's a lot of families that will get to come and meet them there at the jail. And we got a couple other really cool plans with our transition module in actually a couple weeks now. We have a contract with a group called the Adlai School downtown Chicago. We got a small contract. They're going to open up a satellite office for me out in the Markham Courthouse where I think it's 3 days a week they're going to provide mental health services so that when someone leaves my custody, I'm going to fund them getting treatment on the outside because there's nothing else out there. And so, and a lot of them are in the south suburbs, so they'll be able to go to the Adler School, and with or without insurance, we'll take care of them then. But we're also going to bring people in from the outside. I mean, if like a person with no criminal justice background wants to come in, they can come in as well. Yes?
I'm assuming that a lot of people are locked up in part for substance abuse, either offenses or other things. What is the status of continuity in terms of treatment for addiction when they're released?
It's a real mixed bag. I mean, their funding has been horribly cut as well. There's certain groups like Threshold, for example, which fantastic group. They deal primarily with mental illness, their funding has been cut so dramatically too that it isn't as if I've been the first to think up some of these plans as far as bridging to the community. It's just that funding level has been cut so dramatically. There was a couple people, literally right when I started as sheriff, we had this bridge program, we called it, to make the connection on the outside. They lost all of their funding. And so it's really something that I find to be, once again, so puzzling, but good luck trying to get thoughtful discussions about these things in legislative bodies, for example, because the notion that, so say I have someone obviously clean while they're with me, and they're getting counseling and learning, the notion that now they're somehow okay to just go off on their own, no, they're very fragile. So not putting that component on the outside is really not smart. And you can imagine that things will start, coming apart. And then to be honest with you, there's some of these groups that have funding that, I understand it's very difficult for some of these groups right now because the funding is so hard to get and hang on to. But some of them, I just wonder at times what's motivating them, because they just want their beds filled. And whether or not the program's succeeding or not seems to be the least of their worries. And we've had some things just recently pop up with some programs that we thought were pretty solid, and then we're finding out that people who don't even really fit the parameters of the program are in there. And then when I'm pulling them out, the programs tell me, well, what are we supposed to do now? We don't have enough people in our beds. And I was like, well, I didn't think I gave you a guarantee that I'd have X amount of people with this condition in my place at any one time. I go, so my only point though is most of the providers are really good people who are stringing together on a shoestring, but then there's other ones that, honest to God, you just shake your head and say, you gotta be kidding me. It's about sustaining the organization. Whether someone has that need or not, we just gotta sustain it.